Zonabechwa and Bishayawawas. My name is Louise Dixie. I currently am employed as a Cultural Resources Director for the Shoshone Bannock Tribes. But we have a presentation that our historic researcher and the current interim director of our Original Territories and Historic Research Department will be presenting. But just as mentioned by our chairman, Nathan Small, he pointed out that our reservation was established pursuant to the Fort Bridger Treaty of 1868. But this reservation was set aside at the due to the insistence of our Bannock chief leader, Tagi. And the treaty was negotiated in what is now Fort Bridger, Wyoming. But our chief insisted that the Bannock Reservation be on this side of the west side of the Wind River Mountains, all the way to what today is Fairfield, Idaho, in central Idaho. But due to a transcriber's error, it was written as Kansas Prairie. So the Kansas Prairie, being the Camas Prairie in central Idaho, was never included as part of our reservation. So today the tribe has actively had a land acquisition policy for the last 50 to 60 years, so that we're constantly adding additional lands to our reservation and off-reservation areas. We call those areas our Daviwa, meaning we were pushed here to Fort Hall from all different areas: southwestern Montana, western Wyoming, the Yellowstone country, where the Grand Teton country is today, eastern Oregon. At one point, we know that there were over 10,000 Bannocks in the Blue Mountains in Oregon. And today, a lot of them were removed to different reservations. Those who utilized the Boise Valley in western Idaho, the Indian Claims Commission never settled the title to the Boise Valley. So today, we will be returning there. Every year, our tribe has made it a point that we return to our historic areas. So we host cultural events in each of those areas. Last year, we hosted an event at Yellowstone National Park because we were the last ones removed from there, those who came here to Fort Hall. There was 150 years last year that Yellowstone was established, but our treaty goes back beyond that, and our people utilized that country long before that. In fact, we have stories about how that area was created and how the Snake River dams were created. We have a story about that. Also, we have people who occupied southwestern Montana. There was a treaty with the Shoshones, Bannocks, and Sheep-Eater Indians that was never ratified. And that was in August of 1868. So because Congress had stopped ratifying treaties that late in the year, we did not get that treaty ratified, but we return there every year. We host a Virginia City gathering there to remind people that we haven't forgotten where we came from. We also go to Fort Bridger, Wyoming to acknowledge that our treaty was established on July 3rd. It was signed on 1868. But we also had before that an unratified treaty at Soda Springs, Idaho, just east of here, in 1863 that went unratified. So we're very concerned about that area. And I think Kelly and his department will share more information on the phosphate mining that's taking place there. So many of our plants and our animals have been impacted by the mining operations just east of here. But the Soda Springs Treaty was never ratified either. That was signed by Chief Tagi. We also have a treaty at what is known today just north of Mountain Home, Idaho. It was called the Long Tom Creek Treaty. And that Long Tom Creek Treaty was signed to make sure that our people always had access to our areas. There's also the Boise Treaty that was signed in 1864. And that Boise Treaty We were to relinquish 30 miles on east side of the Boise River, and that treaty was never ratified. And the Indian Claims Commission never extinguished the Indian title to that land. So the city of Boise, being the largest one in Idaho and the capital of our state, the Indian title to the land has never been extinguished. And we'll be returning there tomorrow. In fact, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, we host a cultural event there every year. So there were Paiute and Shoshone bands that were moved out of Boise. Many of them were pushed to Burns, Oregon, Fort McDermott, Oregon, and Nevada. The Shoshone Paiutes in Nevada, they're all our relatives. There's even a band of Paiutes that were pushed to Warm Springs, Oregon, and they are our relatives as well. My husband's grandpa was pushed here in the spring of 1868. We had 351 Indians that were rounded up out of the Boise Valley and pushed here to Fort Hall. So there were, among them was my husband's grandpa. His name was Ralph Dixie, and he was only 9 years old when they were pushed from Boise. They arrived here after 30 days of travel from Boise, and it was in the middle of winter. So it was a really difficult time for our people. And then our great grandpa, his name was Charlie Diggy. He was part of that band. So the Boise Shoshones and Bannocks that were removed here to Fort Hall, we never forgot about them. We always go back to Boise to make sure that we say prayers for them so that people don't forget that that is our historic area. And we also have an unratified treaty called the Bruno Treaty. And that was signed by a group of Shoshones, Bannocks, and Northern Paiutes, where today is a reservoir. There's a reservoir that's over that area, just in the Bruno Canyon in southwest Idaho. And that area also was a treaty that, although it was signed, the people thought in good faith that it was valid, but that was never ratified by Congress either. So all of these treaties have impacted us. So we have not forgotten where we came from. And many of those people who were that were rounded up out of the Boise Valley, many of them were shipped to concentration camps at Fort Vancouver in Washington and Oregon, right on the Columbia River. Others were sent up to Fort Simcoe in Washington. The more radical warriors were sent up to Fort Simcoe. So we have a really long history of people who were marched here to Fort Hall. So we're all different bands. So with our language program, our language and culture department, we still today teach the Shoshone language and the Bannock language. And because of COVID, we were having to do that by Zoom, but we found that a lot of our tribal members that live off the reservation are tuning in and learning the language as well. So it's really important that we continue our language, that we continue to practice our cultural teachings. You heard our songs this morning. They sang an honor song, they sang a victory song, and they sang our flag song, which is the American version of the Star Spangled Banner. But that second song they sang was the flag song. But we're really very fortunate here at Fort Hall that we still practice all of our teachings. We still host our warm dances in the winter months to bring, we have certain songs that go along with that, and we still practice that dance. And that's to pray for good weather and good blessings for our people. We also have the ghost dance. Many people think that was lost. It isn't. We still host a ghost dance here annually. It's, but that dance came from what is known as a circle dance. And they say, our teachings tell us that the circle dance came with us when we came here, when we were created. And that circle dance with those songs, it later became the ghost dance. And those songs pray for good things for our people and for all people, and especially for us to have our berries, our roots, our foods that we survive on. So quite similar to many Northwestern tribes, we still depend on a lot of our subsistence survival, because our people still go, unlike other tribes. Go ahead, Nolan. Give him your jump drive. We're going to have Nolan Brown continue on with his presentation. It'll be real quick so that you can hear a little bit more about us.
Hello, Sambe Chua, Naniha Nolan Brown, Language and Culture Preservation Department, did I wake you up. Good morning, my name is Nolan Brown. I am the Original Territories Historic Research Interim Manager and Researcher for the Shoshone Bannock tribes. I apologize, thank you for waiting. I didn't have my vehicle today. I forgot that I dropped it off in the shop this morning. And so when I was ready to leave over here, I didn't have a car. So my presentation will briefly discuss some things that Louise already touched upon. I'll just skip over them because I know Louise mentioned quite a bit about our historical origins, the treaty, and creation of the reservation, as well as the different bands. Is there a clicker I can use to advance slides? Okay, next slide, please. So it's the Fort Hall Reservation. Here are the current boundaries, and of course the interstates coming through. Next slide, please. Our Fort Hall Business Council, this is our current council until June 17th. Next slide, please. Language and Culture Preservation Department. Next. And Louise mentioned the origins of my office to research and substantiate our tribal claims to our original territories. Next slide. All right, so the short history, our chronology. For at least over 13,000 years, people have been living here in the Snake River Valley. The Wasden Cave site near Idaho Falls, demonstrates the manufacture of Folsom points and their use to hunt mammoth and ancient bison. And those cultural traditions and technologies have been carried down all thousands of years. At the Wamuza site here on the Snake River bottoms, the furthest they dug and radiocarbon dated could be going further back, but at AD 40 is the earliest radiocarbon date of the hearths that were found on the bottoms. And this site demonstrates continuous occupation by Shoshone peoples here in the bottoms area, right here in Fort Hall. So going back at least 2,000 years, this has been our homeland, our Tiviwa. So a recent study came out showing that there are horses present in our area found at American Falls, and those radiocarbon dates go back to between 1508 and 1657, which is before the Pueblo revolt of the Spanish in that region. So horses have been here even before then. Pretty long time period, and a long time for our people to adapt and really use the horse culture. 1805 is when Lewis and Clark arrived, meeting the Agaiduka, our salmon eater people, north in the Lemhi region and in southwestern Montana. By 1824, the BIA was created in the War Department. And then through the around 1818 to the 1840s is when the British and then the American fur trappers and traders came into this area and trapped out large areas of the Snake River Valley and others. Nathaniel Wyeth, of course, set up the Fort Hall Trading Post, 1834. And the 1840s is when we really start to see the heavy overland immigration through this area. And the early map that I showed had the Oregon Trail coming right through Fort Hall. It comes right through the area of where the game mine is now today. 1847, the Mormons had established themselves at Salt Lake. By 1851, Chief Washakie had observed the Fort Laramie Treaty. And then by 1858, 1859, with the Pacific Wagon Road coming through Shoshone territories, Special Agent, Indian Agent Frederick Lander, the Pacific Wagon Road Superintendent, was designated by Congress to make agreements with the Shoshonean people for the right-of-way of that Pacific Wagon Road, the only U.S. Congressionally created wagon road, and he was given the task to make an agreement for that right-of-way. So he made these agreements with Chief Washakie at South Pass, 1858, and came back and made payment in 1859. Same thing with Mopua, a Bannock leader at Soda Springs and at Salt River, and with Pocatello at City of Rocks and at Raft River. So these were the early interaction with the United States and our leaders at that time who made these agreements. Next slide, please. But by 1863, with the intense immigration and competition for resources, and the United States expanding, making territorial claims in Shoshone lands, we had the 1863 Bear River Massacre, January. Later that year, it was followed up by many treaties at Fort Bridger, Soda Springs with the Bannocks, the Box Elder Treaty with Pocatello, and the Treaty of Ruby Valley. And then later on, we have other treaties that Louise had mentioned, the Boise and Bruno Valley, Longtime Creek Treaty, and then of course the establishment of the reservation. 10 years after the establishment of the reservation, we had the Bannock War. Next slide, please. Okay, but Louise had mentioned the interrelatedness and connections of our people and the different places that we lived. This map we adapted from Murphy and Murphy to further show the extent of travel and relationships with different plant and animal species that we had. And also in the tan are the historic boundaries of some reservations, and of course some are disestablished, like the Malheur Northern Paiute Reservation was disestablished, and the people from there were moved to different reservations, like Louise said, Warm Springs, also here Fort Hall, of course Duck Valley, Shoshone Paiute, and Burns Paiute. Next slide, please. Again, here's the map of Fort Hall. The current boundaries in yellow, ceded areas here to the south. Next slide, please. And to show you the treaties on a map, here are 13 of them that were signed by Shoshonean people to show you the extent again of our territory. Next slide, please. Here's an image of the actual Fort Bridger Treaty, Washakie, the other leaders, Tagi for the Bannocks made their X mark here on that. Next slide, please. And a photograph, 1869, the year after the Fort Bridger Treaty was signed. And these are reported to be Washakie to the far left, Pocatello, and then 3 other band leaders. And this was taken in Hennifer, Utah. So the relationships between our people are deep and they range far and wide. A couple years later, this same group of men leaders were up north in Deer Lodge, Montana. So this whole expansive territories, we ranged throughout them because we needed to. It's part of our lifestyle and our culture to take what we needed off of the land to survive. Next slide, please. Again, those treaties. Next slide. Another photo of one of our leaders, Chief Tindoy. Next slide. And then this is a photograph of South Pass, where Washakie camped often and where Lander had signed, or had made that first agreement for the right-of-way through our territories. Next slide. Here's a photo, 1872, of the Bannock War, taken by the Hayden expedition. And the one mounted on the left, far left, is purported to be Buffalo Horn, the war leader during the Bannock War. Next slide. And our Bannock people utilize something that we call the Bannock Trail, which ranges from San Diego all the way past Yellowstone, all the way to around Billings, Montana, and even deeper into the plains. But this is a petroglyph that can be found along the Bannock Trail. Next slide, please. Our people had been scattered after the Bannock War, and some escaped traveling the Bannock Trail through Yellowstone, and then they were captured. This photograph is of the prisoners who were taken to Camp Brown, which is Fort Washakie. Next slide, please. And then the year after, we had the Sheep Eater War with Warjack, this man on the left with the rifle, as one of the leaders, 1879. And these were some of the last armed resistance to the United States expansion. Next slide. But the resistance to the United States went into the legal realm, where we had to fight for our treaty rights in Wyoming. Okay. If we could just hop forward. Next. Keep going. Keep going. Okay. All right, so now that it gets us to today, we have become a tribe with the Constitution and bylaws in 1936. By 46, 10 years later, Simplot begins leasing land to mine on back here, 7,000 acres. The total disturbance is something around 7 square miles. 1949, FMC from West Vaco develops the elemental phosphorus plant. And then by 1993, the production stopped. Next slide, please. Here's some photos of these time periods. The original, just scroll through these, original surveys of our lands here behind Mount Putnam, the opening of FMC, keep going. Mining operations. This is an aerial photo of the FMC Superfund site. Since the 70s, they've been trying to expand in this area. Keep going. But our tribe has a land use and administrative departments that oversee the care of our land, and we also have a land use policy commission. You can go to scroll through to the end. And from 13,000 years ago or longer till today, we have been here. We plan to be here continuously, and we will work towards achieving our goals in restoration of our environment and collaborate with as many people and agencies as it takes to accomplish those goals. So thank you. Again, I apologize for the quickness on this, but I hope that I imparted to you a little bit of the history and tribes and the expansiveness of our people, who we are. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, and just to let you know, we have had some comments online. People are saying this is so interesting, and thank you for sharing. So appreciate all of that knowledge sharing.